Legislation and licensing. Introduction to the module. A government establishes and maintains the rules, laws, and policies required to ensure that medicines are safe and effective and that they meet the quality specifications recommended by the regulatory authority for medicines, which can be constituted as a regulatory agency or a regulatory body for medicines. All authorizations for medicinal products for human use and licenses for manufacturers and wholesalers of such products across the UK are issued by the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA. Learning objectives. After completing this module, you should be able to understand the legislation and regulations related to medicines and drugs. Distinguish between policies and protocols. Recognize the factors of licenses and authorizations regarding medications. Legislation. The administration of medication is strictly controlled by law, and there are therefore many pieces of legislation that are relevant to administering medicines to individuals. The Medicines Act 1968. The Act classifies medications into legal categories. The pharmacist or dispensing doctor in your area is in charge of delivering medication. A prescription is required, for example, from a GP dentist. The Misuse of Drugs Act 1971. It regulates the use of controlled drugs to prevent their misuse. It creates additional requirements for prescribing, storing, administering, and disposing of controlled drugs, for example, that they must be stored in a secure, controlled drugs cupboard, witnessed by a trained member of staff when being administered. The Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. It requires both employers and employees to work together to promote a safe work environment and reinforce that health and safety are everyone's responsibility, including when reducing the risks posed by hazardous substances such as medicines. It outlined the main obligations and duties of both employers and employees in the workplace, particularly while dispensing medication. The Control of Substances Hazardous to Health Regulations, COSHH, 2002. It requires employers to conduct a risk assessment to prevent or control the risks of using hazardous substances, for example, medicines. It is to ensure that you and others are working in safe environments and undertaking tasks safely. Employers must have systems in place for safe working practices, such as the use of personal protective equipment, PPE, and the completion of a risk assessment. It requires employers to provide information, training, and supervision so that work activities can be carried out safely, for example, by monitoring workers' practices when administering medication to ensure they are safe. The Hazardous Waste, England and Wales, Regulations 2005. The arrangements must be made to ensure all hazardous waste is disposed of safely, for example, this includes out-of-date or part-used medicines no longer required. For example, by returning all unwanted medication to the pharmacy, by keeping records of all medicines including controlled drugs that have been disposed of or are waiting to be disposed of. The Controlled Drugs, Supervision of Management and Use, Regulations, Amendment, 2013. These regulations amend the Controlled Drugs, Supervision of Management and Use, Regulations 2006. It states who can administer controlled drugs and under what circumstances they must be removed from their role. It outlines how to report and record concerns about administering controlled drugs. The Health and Social Care Act 2008, Regulated Activities, Regulations 2014. Safe care and treatment are concerned with enhancing people's safety in terms of receiving safe care and treatment as well as preventing harm. Medicines must be managed safely and administered appropriately to ensure people's safety. The Misuse of Drugs Amendment Number 2, England, Wales and Scotland, Regulations 2017. These regulations amend the Misuse of Drugs Regulations 2001. The control drugs placed in Schedule 1 to the regulations are those subject to the tightest controls because they are seen as the most dangerous and liable to abuse. Another regulation, Number 3, adds the drug methiopropamine (MPA) and related materials to Schedule 1 to the regulations. Possession of benzodiazepines and Z drugs, such as zopiclone, zolpidem and Zaleplon, is now illegal. Data Protection Act 2018 and General Data Protection Regulation 2018. Information and data, for example, concerning medication, must be processed fairly, lawfully, used only for the purpose it was intended to be used for, be adequate, relevant, accurate, and up to date, and held for no longer than is necessary. Personal information must be recorded, used, stored, and shared to ensure the individual's rights are protected and the security of their personal information, for example, about their medication, is maintained. Organizations are responsible for ensuring that they have adequate arrangements for handling information and that those who work for them comply with their procedures and systems. Policies and protocols. Policies are statements that describe how an organization works. It is usually linked to legislation. Examples include the Safe Handling of Medicines Policy, the policy for storing and administering medication. Protocols or procedures are step-by-step guides of how to complete a task or implement a policy. The evidence-based medication administration protocol can be utilized throughout the hospital to prevent medication incidences, reduce patient falls, and improve the safety culture at the institution. All care settings, including those organizations that administer medication to individuals who live in their own homes, will have their policies and protocols for the safe handling of medication. These are very important because they set out the various ways that medication must be administered and how the effects of medication on individuals must be monitored. Because they are founded on legislation, all care settings and organizations, as well as individuals who work for them, must adhere to them. Licenses and authorizations. The MHRA is responsible for issuing all authorizations for medicinal products for human use, as well as licenses for makers and wholesalers of such items in the UK. MHRA does inspection and enforcement for those particular matters that remain responsible to the Medicine Department of any healthcare providing institution operationally. The MHRA Inspectorate is the lead authority for medicinal inspection arrangements across the UK. Inspection visits throughout Northern Ireland are part of this process to guarantee consistency of approach and assurance of consistent quality. MRG inspectors may accompany MHRA inspectors on joint inspections. The Human Medicines Regulations 2012, which went into effect on August 14, 2012, unified medicine legislation, including much of the Medicines Act 1968, into a single set of new regulations. The Secretary of State for Health in England and the Minister for Health in Northern Ireland are the ministers in charge of enforcing the Medicines Act. The 1968 Medicines Act regulates the licensing, supply, and administration of medicines. Besides, with the implementation of the Veterinary Medications Regulations in 2005, veterinary medicines were withdrawn from the scope of the Medicines Act. The 1968 Act established a licensing framework for the manufacture and distribution of medicines. Some exceptions were made for specific individuals, mostly to allow effective treatment in the area of drugs. The Medicines, Pharmacies, Responsible Pharmacist, Regulations 2008. These regulations outline the responsibilities of responsible pharmacists, who are mandated by Section 72A of the Medicines Act 1968 to ensure the safe and efficient operation of a pharmacy business at the location from which it operates. The roles of those involved in safe handling medicine. All of the specifics in the legislation provide a framework for those involved in the safe and secure handling of medicines, and they can be utilized to build working practices, policies, and procedures. Medicines are utilized in various types of healthcare settings, and safe and secure medication handling is critical for patient safety. In all healthcare settings, safe and secure handling of drugs applies to all pharmacists and other health workers whose work involves handling medicines. Good practice includes getting drugs, transporting them, receiving them, manufacturing or manipulating them, and storing them. The health staff are also well versed in information regarding the dispensing of medications, as well as their removal or disposal. They also play an important role in the storage of medications, the handling of prohibited substances, and the safe and secure handling of medicines in operating rooms and other healthcare facilities. Highlights from the module. Employers must have systems in place for safe working practices, such as the use of personal protective equipment, PPE, and the completion of a risk assessment. All of the specifics in the legislation provide a framework for those involved in the safe and secure handling of medicines, and they can be utilized to build working practices, policies, and procedures. The MHRA is responsible for issuing all authorizations for medicinal products for human use, as well as licenses for makers and wholesalers of such items in the UK. The 1968 Act established a licensing framework for the manufacture and distribution of medicines. We have reached the end of the module.